It's taught in Islam that Jesus himself was not killed and hung on the cross, but someone else was hung instead. The word God is used as a cudgel by the powerful, and occasionally it's used as a healing or a soothing by the downtrodden too. Jesus was not Christian. He never became a Christian. Even though religion is an invention, if you look at it from another point of view, it is also a discovery. And beyond that principle, it's like going back before the Big Bang. Like, we have no access to that data. Is the destiny of religion to flow together into the sea or continue branching out?
I read that you said you can't really understand the world around us without knowing something about religion. So what's the problem with us not being taught about world religions, and what are we missing out on?
Well, we're missing out on all the questions that rise above us. And I think if we study art, if we study music, if we study poetry, we get a bit of that. The mysterious and the sort of that which we either is unified or which we wish was unified about the understanding really where we came from, except in very obvious prosaic terms, which is from our DNA. We miss all the questions about why are we here. And one of, we think, the unique things about our species is that we ask questions like that. The purpose of being alive? Is it simply to reproduce or to accumulate or to dominate or to just survive? And to most wise people, as the years have gone by, those have not seemed like big enough answers. Now, perhaps we've always been wrong, and perhaps religion really is just wish fulfillment, but many people have found deep fulfillment in religion. And it's funny, it seems to appear in all times and places and at all points in history. That certainly takes on different form, and sometimes it's organized, and sometimes it's simply a matter of people wondering and sometimes pontificating after they're done wandering. They think they've figured things out by wandering. But religion just seems to be an innate human function, trying to understand the one, the more, and what those things are. It really depends, I think, on the individual and very much in their culture. So if you have a good education in economics and a good education, especially in science, is very important, and mathematics, you are understanding a lot of reality. But there is much more to reality than that part which we have scientifically proven. And it's possible that someday we will evolve so far that we will scientifically find the thing that we call God, and we'll be very surprised that it turns out to be something different. And to which I say, hooray. And I hope for the day that happens. But it's a universal longing. It's a universal curiosity. And so much as you could say, why would you study literature? Or why would you study musical composition? Why wouldn't you just enjoy music? Or any of those questions. Why would you bother to figure out trigonometry when your calculator can do it for you? And I think the answer is that the poets call it a God-shaped hole, and we need to fill that hole. We just instinctively do so. And it could be a delusion, but in my life, I have not experienced it as a delusion. I've experienced it as the study of religion as a really beautiful and interesting endeavor.
Yeah, and what's one thing people tend to get wrong about religion, or any common misconceptions about religion as a whole?
There are a lot of them, but a lot of people mistake religion for God. So they will say, I don't believe in God. And what they mean, I think, is all the stories I've heard about God seem wrong to me, and I don't believe in them. And that's not quite the same as believing in the actual God, if there is one. And I'm a Christian. I do believe there is one. And people will rail against religion, but they will say that they're railing against God. And sometimes it's the other way around. But we mustn't confuse the organized practice with the more eternal and spiritual effort to reach out, as I said, to what's greater and deeper than we are.
Yeah. And so what you said about the internal feeling or belief or longing compared to the institution, what is the difference between those two? Could you therefore not believe in the institution of religion, but still believe in some sort of God? Is that what you're trying to say?
Oh, yeah, very much. And I think certainly in the UK, And I would say in the United States and Canada, I think, I don't know, maybe 40, 50% of educated people, or maybe even uneducated people, feel exactly that. They don't believe in religion, but they do believe in something. And if you sit with them and listen and unpack what they mean by something, it's usually something like what I would call God. But they avoid the use of the word God for very good reasons, because that word is used particularly in politics and in the history of world conquest. The word God is used as a cudgel by the powerful, and occasionally it's used as a healing or a soothing by the downtrodden too.
So how do you deal with that personally if throughout history it's been used in a certain way and it's been almost politicized? How do you deal with your maybe well being part of the institution, whereas other people may not agree with that? Well, how do you feel about that connection, and what do you
Yeah,
think about people politicizing it?
it's it. I'm an academic, so I probably go too quickly into my head to rationalize it. But I often think um, it's interesting that this person is changing the conversation from their own search for meaning to the politics of somebody else, and it's an easy move to make. I will probably do it several times in our conversation because I follow politics closely and I love podcasts on history and things, but I don't think that the politics of religion is the real point. I think that is often a tribal argument that people make to justify their own group or their own aspirations.
Yeah. And you mentioned there's almost this innate part of us seeking some sort of religion. Are there any other reasons why religions have developed throughout history from your research?
Well, there's kind of a crude evolutional argument which I make in my book, and my book is now 10 years old. It was written for my secondary school students here in the United States. And I think I now don't really believe as strongly in that evolutional approach where religion started out with really simple societies, hunter-gatherer societies, believing in a God in the sky. And then with the advent of agriculture, they were forced to confront the problem of settling down and the need to have good weather and good climate and good soil, and that not happening, and them imagining a sort of person, usually female, that governs that. I think the evolutional path has been much more varied than that. The idea that polytheism is a result of settling in cities, you find that all over academia. I'm beginning to think that that's not the only reason. Urbanization, of course, gave people an experience, especially if they've just moved to a city, of lots of specialists running around doing individual particular things and bonding in groups. And usually cities were created by someone very powerful and rich, whether it was a lord or an emperor or a pharaoh. And usually the stories, Greek mythology comes to mind, all the stories about the different gods dominating different lines of work and different efforts by people. You've got a messenger god and you've got a fertility goddess, and city life is complicated. So religious mythology becomes complicated. And then the mystery of why exactly monotheism has become so predominant in the world, with Christianity and Islam being the notable examples, and many types of Hinduism. With that, explaining it using evolution becomes a little more difficult because we're still mostly in cities. So why aren't we polytheistic? There's a sense in which perhaps a little polytheism might produce a little more tolerance for diversity. That's my sense of the origin of religion, is it goes hand in hand with the origin of so many other human inventions. And
Yeah.
religion is absolutely an invention.
What would you say to someone who doesn't believe that religion is an invention? And if just because we invented it, does that still doesn't mean we invented God, right? God still could have been there before. How do
That's
you
right.
square that circle?
I square that circle by going to Taoism and to the yin and yang. Even though religion is an invention, if you look at it from another point of view, it is also a discovery. The Norse explorers and Christopher Columbus, and for all we know, Chinese mariners did not discover the New World, America. America was there, and there were plenty of people who were there. When they arrived in America and they found lots of mammoths to hunt across the Bering Sea land bridge, they weren't discovering something in the sense of inventing it. It was already there. They gave names to it, to the places, and they gave names to the animals if they weren't familiar with them. But religion is also a discovery. There is, in fact, a much bigger and much deeper reality than the one that we know. We can only live in 3 dimensions plus, as Einstein taught us, time. So 4 dimensions, that's it. But physics tells us that even though we can't perceive them, there are quite a few other dimensions, many of them sort of microscopic, that have to do with tunneling and things turning inside out and things being simultaneously in 2 places at once. And our brain, which only can conceive of in 3 dimensions plus time, we just can't understand that. So we could either deny that that reality is there, or when we get some evidence of it, whether it's in a dream or in a love story or in an equation, we suddenly see a little bit more of the mystery. When we name it, we're inventing it, but it is not our invention. It is really there. And so as a religious person, as a believer in God, I think God really is there, whatever God is. Human religions are inventions designed to apprehend that, and we're discovering that. So I would tell that person, I agree with you, but I was speaking out of the yang side of my mind rather than the yin side. And good for you, I would say to them, because the yin, although it's darker, is just as powerful as the yang. It's just 2 sides of reality.
Yeah, I really like that notion of it being a discovery, like indicating it was already there. That's a really good perspective of it. And in terms of yin and yang, what is the difference between the two, first of all? Because you've just given an example, but for those who aren't really sure or don't know much about the differences between yin and yang, could you just explain that first?
I'll be happy to. And when I'm finished, I want to give you a chance to say more about why you like that distinction between invention and discovery, because I sort of dropped it in there and I wonder what you think. But to answer your specific question, Chinese philosophy distinguishes between 2 essential forces in the world, and they are part of a unified field of energy called the Tao. And it's spelled Tao in English just because academics 100 years ago decided to spell Chinese things differently than they did with the new pinyin. So it's pronounced Tao, but it's spelled Tao. But I'll use the D sound. The Tao is the basic flow of the universe. It's the energy. It is a 2-sided field, and both sides are true and both sides are real. And both sides are usually invisible, except when they manifest themselves in action and in material reality. So the yin typically is the darker. It's considered female as a poetic metaphor. It's considered more receptive, more of a listening force. The yin is the shadow, it's night, it's repose, it's intuition. And on the other side is yang. And yang is energetic, and yang builds things and constructs things. Yang goes to war, yang conquers. I'm using all these male sounding words because poetically they use the metaphor of maleness, even though that is not an anatomical description. But in Chinese medicine, when you go to an acupuncturist and you see that diagram of a naked person with lines everywhere, you could ask the doctor about the yin and yang of those lines, and the doctor might well be able to tell you, we are tapping into some yin energy because what's wrong with you is an excess of yang, or what's wrong with you is that you're emphasizing yang too much, or your yang muscles are contracting and they need to, what's the opposite of contract? They need to sort of relax. Yin and yang can be applied to everything in life. And Chinese medicine is just one example. Chinese cooking. I'm not sure if you're a fan of Chinese cooking, but you will always notice that there's more than one predominant flavor. Something's not just sweet. It's got a little bitter, or it's got a little salt, or it's not just that umami flavor. It also has some overtones of sourness. So anyway, the combination of yin and yang is is really celebrated and studied in all the Chinese religions. And the two most famous ones are Taoism, which was invented in China but heavily influenced by Buddhism, and it got passed along to Japan, where it got turned into Chan or Zen Buddhism. And then the other famous Chinese religion isn't really a religion like you and I think of religion, but it's Confucianism. It's a philosophy of life, and it's especially a philosophy of how societies should conduct themselves. So you got Taoism and Confucianism. Both of them view the yin and the yang as very important. Taoism is the more yin. It's a little more relaxed. It's a little more focused on leading your life by going with the flow of life, not resisting, but flexing. Its sacred scripture is simply books of poetry, which sometimes are very paradoxical, but they always make you smile when you read them and you understand the wisdom there. The most famous is Tao Te Ching, which has many English translations. There's also in Confucianism, on the other hand, there are very elaborate ideas about human relationships, how a good parent will treat a child, how a good leader will treat his subjects, how spouses will treat each other. It's rather patriarchal. It's very preoccupied with primogeniture and the privileges of the older toward the young, the younger. But Confucianism was in a way a little bit like Plato's Republic, his famous work where Socrates describes a kingdom ruled by a philosopher king. And the king is still a despot. The king is still, his word is the law, and he is a he, not a she. But Confucianism governs all that. It suggests that people should get jobs by their merit and by what they earn and not by who they're related to or who they bribe. And so it's an ethical system, and it particularly reveres ancestors because that just continues the hierarchy, as you can imagine. The people who are alive now, from the littlest kid to the oldest, and then to the dead, and to the ancestors, and the highest ancestor of all, Shangti, who is kind of the first being and the one that deserves the most respect. And you could say they worship ancestors, or you could say they revere them or respect them or honor their memory, and they try to follow in their path, presuming their path was the good one, and the good one is very carefully laid out. Whereas Taoism, on the other hand, to get back to that, it really is more of an individual's approach to flowing in life, to being flexible, to solving problems by resolving them rather. Taoism has an organized religion attached to it, and it has a lot of art and music and health sciences that are associated with it. But underneath both of those religions is this idea of yin and yang. Even in Confucianism, which I've made sound very hierarchical, it's very important to have a balance and to be moderate, not extreme in your approach.
And how would someone know if their yin and yang was unbalanced? You mentioned just the art of being balanced, but what would that actually look like in the modern day or a modern person's life?
Well, probably if they don't know, they've been living too much in the external world and they need to go inside. They need to consider their inner world and what's motivating them, what's driving them, what's bothering them. Yeah, and in so doing, I think they would, often with the help of a teacher or a doctor, they could get a better balance. They might just think about, are they driving themselves too hard? It's time for more yin, time for more listening, time for more repose, time for more reflection and observation, and not quite as much aggressiveness.
And are there any examples of yin and yang in other major religions like Christianity or in the Bible and the Quran? Not explicitly necessarily, but just through the stories and narratives.
Sure. In St. John's version of the end of the world, in the book of the Revelation, the yin and yang are represented not as two sides of the same coin, but two opposing sides in an eternal battle. And it's a battle where the forces of light, symbolized by Jesus, who is symbolized in many ways in that dream, and his angelic forces fighting against Satan and his. And that was a minority view in early Christianity, but an important enough one that it made it into the Bible. It got included in the Bible. In Islam, there are echoes of that, where a person is born and they're viewed as having come straight from the presence of God. So if you've just been in the presence of God and God is all good, then you are inherently good. You don't have any blemish on your soul. There's no original sin in the Muslim belief. You're a perfectly good blank slate. And then throughout your life, the force of shaitan, the tempter, which is the same, comes from the same word as the Hebrew Satan, that evil force is tempting you all the time. And it's usually mischievous. It usually tells you to take a shortcut or tell a little lie to make somebody like you more, or cheat your customers. It just suggests that you don't do things the right way. And the more familiar you get with all those shortcuts, and the more you start to think that you are the most important being in the universe, you are forgetting that, according to Islam and Christianity and Judaism too, there's only one God, there's only one goodness, and it's not you. It's something higher and greater and deeper than you. And so when you start acting like you're so smart and you're so powerful and you should always have your way, if you're a baby, that's normal. But if you're a grown up, that's a problem. And that is diagnosed as Satan having had much too much influence on you. And Satan in Islam, just as in Christianity, is viewed as kind of an external evil force, whereas God is both external and internal and dwells in you, although the Muslims would say you usually forget it. And when you forget that God dwells in you, then that's when you sin. That's when you miss the mark. And missing the mark, by the way, is the Jewish definition, the Hebrew definition of sin. You're aiming to do something and you miss. You get it wrong. You're not horrible. You're not evil. You're not going to hell. You just got it wrong. And you need to, if life is like archery, you need to practice more so that you hit the bullseye or get closer to the bullseye and you don't miss the mark.
And what does that look like in everyday life, getting closer to the mark? Or what is the antidote to sinning, or at least what is a way to become more aligned with the right way?
Well, the Dalai Lama would say it's compassion. That's all you need to know. He would say the answer to every such question is compassion. And compassion is when your heart and the other person's heart, you can picture them being kind of one and connected. And so would you hurt another person or would you cheat another person if they are a part of you? Of course not. And doesn't it make you feel better when someone loves you? Well, so why not extend that to everybody? And the trick is that sometimes loving is harder, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. So compassion is a very simple answer. It's not easy. You're gonna have to excuse me, Mike.
No worries, it's fine.
Compassion, I was saying, is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And so that applies to every situation in your daily life. And if you are in a situation and you can't imagine compassion helping you at that moment, the Buddha would say, think again.
Yeah, that's really good advice and a good way to live your life. But how would you internalize that? Would you just have to keep reminding yourself to be compassionate? So, like, what would go through your mind, or how would you behave to be compassionate?
Yeah, there are therapists in Zen who practice a particular kind of morita therapy. It's named after the Zen master in Japan who invented it. And the idea is you quit thinking about it so much and you find ways to practice it all the time so it becomes a habit. If you're a footballer and you're trying to learn how to just bend a corner kick enough so that one really tall player can have a chance at a header, you don't simply visualize it or, look at my favorite player, Bukayo Saka. You don't look at Saka doing it over and over again with that left-footed kick of his that's so gorgeous. You practice. You go out on the pitch and you practice again and again. And if you can't find enough places to practice, then you need to find a community which practices in Buddhism. That could be called a zendo or an ashram. And Hinduism and Christianity, we call it a church. Every church is focused on teaching you how to be compassionate all the time. But ideally, that's what Christian churches should be doing all the time, is just helping you to get better at it, giving you some tasks and celebrating people who do it and helping you to forgive yourself when you don't and to make amends when you need to.
Yeah. And I like the Judaism notion that it's not that you're not evil if you do sin. It's just a mistake and you just got to try better next time. Is that only the case in Judaism, or is that also the case in the other major religions, or is that something that separates Judaism from the other religions?
Judaism is just wonderful in that it has a nice, memorable Hebrew word, hate, which means missing the mark. It means sin. And so it's very memorable. It's very teachable. But Christianity, in the original form taught by Jesus and by St. Paul, certainly means that. And Islam certainly teaches it. In Hinduism is so different from these Western religions I've been talking about. In Hinduism, because of reincarnation, the universe will wait for you. And it will wait for you to live many, many, many lives. And during those many lives, each time you're alive, you have a chance to do better, chance to do what your given duty is, to experience karma, which is, the old idea that what goes around comes around, to really experience the effects of your decision and to learn from that. And so Hinduism says eventually we all end up like all the different rivers on a continent flowing together out into the sea, and the sea is infinity. The sea is what, I would call God in Sanskrit, the oneness of everything. And that's a rather different goal, and it's a very different method because of reincarnation. That whole subject in India is so big and so interesting that there are whole university courses devoted to nothing but, and you should take one.
Yeah. And how did Hinduism actually emerge, and when did it emerge?
It's a wonderful question. It's a far bigger question than I know how to answer. Hinduism actually is a label that the British applied because British academics somehow wanted to describe all the religions of India. Really, Hinduism just means Indiaism. And India, as you know, has so many cultures and languages and cuisines and religions. And the genius of Hinduism, if it is one big thing, is to say that all of these religions are part of the effort to climb the mountain, and they all climb a different path up the mountain, and they all try to reach the summit. And when the religion helps an individual or a group to reach the summit, then that individuality ceases to exist, and it becomes it becomes part of the whole universe, the one reality of Brahman. How that got started is different in every place. Certainly the Persian conquests of India at different times were very influential. It's hard for me to pin down other specific examples from outside of India. I think mostly they were indigenous peoples and civilizations, and it's very, very old. There's not a single answer. In my TED Talk on the 5 major religions, which gets a lot of viewing in America by high school seniors who are studying for the International Baccalaureate exam, and there's part of world cultures that kind of requires you to know at least something of the basics. In that video, they asked me to please specify the founder of each religion. So I picked Krishna because he's such a famous figure in the scriptures of Hinduism, but he didn't found Hinduism. He was a god made man, just like Jesus, who really helped develop some of the most important ideas that almost all Indians all over believe in. Those are things like I've been mentioning, like karma, like doing your duty, which is called dharma, like Brahman, the big universal soul, like Atman, which is the part of that soul that lives in you, which is what we Christians call the Holy Spirit, but it's not exactly the same. It's a different religion.
Yeah, I didn't realize how complex it was. And do you think one day it won't be called Hinduism because that's just kind of an umbrella term, and there'll just be specific Indian religions per region? Because it's just like, how similar are they to each other as well? Is it completely different? Because you said there's loads of paths going up to the one mountain. So I guess there's a common goal or a common realization at some point. But how different are they to each other? And how many are there? They're like hundreds, thousands.
There are hundreds, and I know of a Hindu teacher who would say that there are millions because there are that many people who are actively studying it and thinking about it. And Hinduism never excommunicates somebody. They don't say, oh, you're not a Hindu anymore. Or perhaps they might say that, but the philosophy of Hinduism says that all these are part of one thing. But if you go back to the mountain idea, they all believe in climbing. They all believe that the air gets thinner up there. They all believe that there is something at the top that's worth finding. They all believe that you should help the other people on the path with you. And they all believe, as I mentioned a minute ago, in those really basic concepts of reincarnation, of the soul inside a person, also being part of the world soul. They all believe somehow that your social position, whether it's a strict caste that you are born into, which, as you know, is very predominant in India, but there's some efforts to modify it or reform it or maybe even wipe it out in the long run. That will succeed. But that idea of a hierarchy existing not just in this life, but in all your reincarnated lives, that you're really trying to advance in that hierarchy and you're trying to get higher. And just as you would get higher in a caste system, so would you get higher in your knowledge and in your compassion. And also in really, I would say all Hindu teachings, so that the most important thing you can do is to detach yourself from the material world, from attachments to other people, from the need for approval and the need for almost all material things. So a homeless fellow by the side of the road could well be a saint who, when he dies, will not come back because he has so mastered his body and his material surroundings that he really doesn't need them anymore, and his soul is free. And that idea of it's called moksha in Sanskrit, that moksha, that release from the bonds of the physical world, I would say is pretty much there in all of the different Hinduisms. So yeah, they have a lot in common because they're all climbing a mountain, but no, they're quite different from each other. Just as Indian cuisine is different from north to south and from Punjab to Bengal.
Yeah. And why is there often a notion of detaching and releasing yourself from material desires in Hinduism and I think in Buddhism as well? And what about the other religions? Is there emphasis on releasing your material desires in Christianity as well?
Not very much these days. And if I were smarter than I am, I would venture to say that that's because Christianity has become so tied up in the success, at least for Europeans, of colonialism and of capitalism. And both colonialism and capitalism are the opposite of that. They have to do with acquiring and controlling and dominating. You go back to yin and yang, that's yang.
Yeah.
And a wise Taoist would say that's just the Christianity, capitalism. Oh man, there's just too much yang. Now, Jesus, paradoxically, was a wandering holy man. And we only have records of 3 years of his teaching before he was executed. But he told his followers not to take anything. Sandals and one extra garment and maybe a walking stick, and just beg or count on the kindness of strangers, as if you just ring somebody's doorbell and say, hi, I'm here, and they will help you. And the experience of his followers is that was often true. There are just really compassionate, wonderful people all around that will help you. So Jesus would say, don't worry about what you're going to wear or what you're going to eat or, anything. Just trust in God. And by God, he means the path, what Taoism would call the Tao. The Holy Spirit will just take you through your life and you're going to be okay. That does not get preached very much. And in Christianity, it doesn't get taught very much. And even I own a nice house and my family has 2 cars, and whenever I want to go visit family in another city, I've got a son and daughter-in-law in London, and we come to London all the time. We just get on the plane, and this little magic thing in my phone pays for it. And suppose I'm trusting in the Holy Spirit, but if I really live that way, I suppose I would have to become a monk of some kind. But to me, that's too much yin. So I'm not willing to go that far. And I do think giving to others is very important. Without describing my life as a retired academic, most of what I do all day is volunteer work for the poor and teaching, like I'm teaching with you. And I'm not accumulating anything anymore. I'm spending. And maybe when I die,
Yeah, but it's good that you're aware of that, and I do like the notion that being a young monk might be too yin. And do you think the balance of yin and yang for your life is now giving back? Is that a way for people to have more of a balance? And can that be different depending on what age you are? Do you think you should try and seek that balance even as a teenager in your 20s and 30s? Because a lot of people are driven and have a lot of energy and a lot of yang, it seems, in their 20s and 30s and maybe even beyond. Do you think it's okay to periodize the yin yang, or is it more ideal or maybe better for you to try and balance it all throughout your life?
I would say that both of those alternatives, Jacob, are correct. I think periodization is a beautiful word. I'm going to steal it from you. Hinduism teaches that there are four stages in life. And without going into too much detail, the first two stages have to do with getting and achieving and developing and building and dominating. And it's the third stage, which is retirement, which is where I am, where you begin to give away and let go and release yourself. So maybe a Taoist and a Hindu, if they got together, they would say, well, the first two stages, you have to overdo the yang a little. The two stages, you can make up for it by doing more yin. I think a good therapist or a good guru would tell you, if you're, for example, a young lawyer working 70 hours at a law firm and you haven't been out with your friends in weeks and you're spending all of your time on your devices, even when you're exercising, and you haven't been for a walk in the woods without any devices at all for months, you're really out of balance. And yes, you're at a young stage of life. Yes, but I think the teacher would say you're really overdoing it. And are you happy? And that's when the Dalai Lama would look at you. Of course, the Dalai Lama, if you were a Tibetan Buddhist, would say, oh, you should become a monk for a while. Not for your whole life, but how about just come and live with us in the monastery for a few years and wear those cool red robes and play those instruments and chant with us in a language that you don't even understand yet, but that's the language of the gods. And you would learn a lot. And some of the habits that you pick up in the monastery, when you go back and you establish a household and perhaps have children, you'll be better at that period of your life than you would have been had you just gone straight to medical school or straight into an apprenticeship in becoming an electrician so you can wire people's houses. And you just wired as many houses as you could day after day after day and advanced in the trade, and you didn't really develop your whole self.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally get that. And as the example that you gave of walking in the woods without a device and people not doing that, I guess that would be a good way of incorporating the yin in the yang period of your life, because like the whole point of the symbol is there's a yang in the yin and a yin in the yang, right? So I guess a good example would be to get off your phone or take a day off. That's the whole point of the weekend, right? That's the yin part of the week, isn't it?
Precisely right. The yin and yang, just as you said, each white squirrel has a black dot and the black squirrel has a white dot. And those dots are the opposites. And those are reminders that there's another side to this coin.
Yeah. And going back to a different major religion, Judaism, how and when did Judaism emerge?
Well, there have been many stages. I don't think it was even really called Judaism until maybe the time of the Roman Empire, perhaps Alexander's empire. Before that, I think people would call themselves Israelites or Judahites. Before that, they were the escaped slaves from Egypt, and they would have called themselves Hebrews. Before that, that gets difficult because the slaves didn't leave written records. The Bible attempts to describe what we would now call Jewish life was, the lives of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and those really long, who are so mythological. I'm quite sure somebody existed who either had that name or soon after their death was given that name. And I'm sure they were, in fact, nomads as described. I'm sure they did live on the edge of different empires, and different kings bestowed on them, wives or stole them for slavery. But it's so far in the past that it's hard to say. So if you said Moses founded Judaism because he received the Torah on Mount Sinai, that's 1500 years before the Common Era. If you said it was Abraham, that was probably 1800 years. If it was before Abraham, I think you could say there wasn't really anything like Judaism yet. There were people who, like Abraham, devoted themselves to God as if God was one, as opposed to, polytheism. That's a great question. I'd probably pick Moses, but I think most Jews would pick Abraham. That's good.
Yeah. And why do you think the one God concept actually emerged? And was it Judaism that was the first religion or major religion to incorporate it?
I wish I knew. It is a historical fact that it did emerge and that it is now dominant. It's likely that Abraham and his people and Moses were among the first, but you have hints even in the Bible and the Jewish and Christian and Muslim versions of Scripture that there are other gods around, but they're not for us. And the idea that there actually is only one God and those other gods are all fake, my guess is that idea didn't come along really until the 500s, 600s BCE. And that was part of this worldwide flowering of philosophy that led to people like Lao Tzu in China and Confucius and Plato and Socrates and Isaiah and Amos and just all these fantastic thinkers who tried to pull it all together into a single principle. And, when the Dalai Lama says that the key to living a good life is compassion, and the identifying marker of a true religion is compassion, that's monotheism. He's just not saying that monotheism is a personal being. He's saying, yeah, we have different gods and we pay attention to them because they embody different things. But really, when you get up to the very top of the mountain, it's not a bunch of different gods anymore. It's one principle. And beyond that principle, it's like going back before the Big Bang. Like, we have no access to that data.
Yeah. It's a really good way to describe it. It's really, really insightful. I appreciate it. And what is the Jewish way of life and how does it differ from other religions?
My friends who are teachers are mostly Reform or conservative Jews in the United States, and they most often answer that question with a little phrase, tikkun olam, which means to heal the world. And the essence of Judaism, they would say, and this is rabbinic Judaism, this is not the original Judaism of the temple or King David or that kind, but the rabbinic Judaism, the portable Judaism that's based on the scripture and the study and the following of all the commandments of God, is the world is broken. It's been cracked open, and we need to put it back together and to repair it. And that is your lifelong task, and you yourself will not do it. We together will work on doing it. And anything in your life that you do to save a life or make a life better or to protect lives is good. And that applies to all lives, not just Jewish lives. But being that this is a faith that is of a very small, relatively insignificant tribe that's very old and has only had control of its quote unquote own land for very short episodes in history, it is more tribal. And more of their ceremonies and rituals have to do with things that really only apply to Jews and their relationship with God, because they don't really presume to tell other people what to do. What they want to be is a kind of a light to others by which people can see the right path. And most Jews that I know are very accepting of other religions. And it has long since ceased being a part of Judaism to try to convert a lot of people. Christianity and Buddhism both are still very busy trying to attract others, and Islam certainly. And, those are the three biggest religions of the world, and that's why. But I would just use the word biggest synonymously with numbers of people, and that's not the only meaning of big.
Yeah. And what's one thing people get wrong about Judaism?
That it's all about Israel. And if you look at the news at all, it's very understandable that someone would think that Judaism is all about getting a country and ruling the country and dominating the country. And there was certainly a historic period that's recorded in the Bible where that was true. And there have been a number of historic periods since then where it wasn't true, and Jews, among other things, were mourning the loss of that place. We're seeing now how difficult it is to be faithful to those ideals that I've been talking about and occupy a piece of ground that plenty of other people have been occupying for thousands of years too, and their children are still there too. And I think a lot of people, very understandably, will confuse Judaism, the religion, with Zionism, the nationalism, or with the desire to create a Jewish state and to defend it and to build it up. Judaism is a kind of a civilization. It's a way of life. It's a cuisine. It's a bunch of different languages. Certainly, it was true in Europe that it was a bunch of different languages and different styles of cooking. It's a religion of memory of what the ancestors did and what they fought for. And some of it certainly does have to do with just the survival of the tribe and the territory. But purely as a religion, as a way of life, that's quite different.
Yeah. And how does Christianity and Judaism link, and how do they see each other? Because I'm correct in saying that Judaism originated before Christianity, and is there quite a lot of mention of Hebrews and Judaism in, is it not the Old Testament quite a lot as well? And I'm not sure about the New Testament, but what is the relationship between the two different religions?
You're exactly right. All of what Christians call the Old Testament, and my Jewish friends laugh and say, why don't you just call it the Older Testament? It's not old. It's still very much alive for us. What we Christians call the Old Testament, Jews simply call it the Bible or the Scriptures or the Tanakh. But it has so much in common, it's almost hard to differentiate. But Christianity emerged with Jesus, who didn't really want to found a new religion. I think Jesus wanted very much to reform the practice of Judaism. And the people who carried it on after him, because they believed that he had been resurrected from the dead, which meant that he was somehow supernatural, he was somehow God, that he wasn't just in the past tense, but he's somehow alive now. And his spirit and his approach continued, and people were so convinced in this resurrection thing, which is the name they eventually gave to it, because it's so mysterious, it's hard to put a name on it. But, Jesus is still around is the idea. But they call it resurrection. They were so convinced that they were willing to die. Right? And it spread throughout the Roman Empire, and especially with famous people like St. Paul, it spread to Gentiles who, in other words, non-Jews, who really admired Judaism, and they admired the way that Jesus taught Judaism, which is really weird. Jesus was not Christian. He never became a Christian. When he was baptized, baptism then was a Jewish thing invented by a prophet named John the Baptist, who also was not a Christian. It's weird. It's almost impossible for us to understand. And so the followers of Jesus really invented Christianity as a new religion. And it became very much a Greek religion at first, and then Roman. And then it spread all over the world, in Egypt and in India and in Persia, in many places. And it really became a world religion. Judaism did not have that ambition. And the vast majority of Jews at the time that Christianity was forming, they sort of looked at Christianity and said, well, that's not the way we want to go. We're going to continue without the temple, without the king, without Jerusalem, but we still have the Torah. And we're going to study this, and we're going to learn about how God wants us to live. And so Judaism became a religion where its people were spread throughout the world, but it wasn't a world religion. They weren't into marketing like Christians were, like Christians still are. In a lot of ways, Islam is closer to Judaism, even though it came afterward, like you said. Islam basically takes just about everything that Jesus taught, except that Jesus was God, and they don't believe that Jesus said that about himself. They believe that people afterward put those words in Jesus' mouth. So Muslims don't believe that Jesus was God, but they believe he was a prophet. They even believe he was the Messiah, which is a Jewish word meaning the one God anointed or chose. I know a number of Muslim teachers who say there really wasn't any prophet more powerful, and so we disagree with you Christians who worship him, but we revere him deeply, and we especially revere his mother, Mary. And in fact, Mary appears a whole lot more in the Quran than she does in the New Testament. They also believe that all of the revelations to Abraham and Noah and Moses and David and Esther and so many others, those are all true and valid, and they really came from God. But when they got distorted by their historical context, or by whoever it was that was translating, wanting the thing to say something that God didn't mean. And so according to Islam, Muhammad was asked by God, it was really ordered by God, to listen carefully to a series of revelations, to memorize them, to go back to, society. He lived in a town called Mecca, and teach it, repeat it, recite it. And those days people could recite stuff like, you can't believe. They had it all memorized. And that revelation, according to the way Muhammad recited it, and these are not the words of Muhammad, these are the words of God's final explanation of all the stuff that maybe Christians and Jews got slightly wrong. And so Muslims, they don't really like to translate the Quran. They go ahead and learn Arabic so they can recite it and memorize it and sing it and play it in their cars when they're driving around and hum it under their breath. And it's like listening to God talking.
That's a really great way to connect all three of those together, because I didn't realize how connected Islam actually was to Judaism and to Christianity as well. For context, when was Muhammad around compared to...
He was around in the early 600s, and Jesus was around like 0. And Judaism goes back, as I said earlier, to Moses and to Abraham, as much as 1800, even 2000 years back. And if this was a tree, Islam would be a newer branch. Judaism would be the trunk. Judaism, it just puts roots right down into the ground. And Christianity would be sort of the first big branch that really thrived. And Judaism is still there. It's still a branch, but the tree of world religions, the branch that's called Judaism, is not a very thick one. It just is really long.
Yeah, great description. And so how often is Jesus mentioned in the Quran? Is it actually quite often?
He's mentioned a lot. His mother is mentioned even more often.
In what way they mentioned, though? Because you said it's almost revisionist in a way, of Judaism and Christianity, in the sense that Jesus isn't the Son of God according to... Is that right? They don't think Jesus was God himself in Islam. So how is he spoken about, and how is Mary spoken about in the Quran compared to the other two religions?
Jesus is considered a prophet. He's considered a a spokesperson for God, someone who had access to God's wisdom, and who lived in perfect, even sinless accord with God's will. So they would agree that Jesus never sinned. There are a couple of references in the sayings of Muhammad, if not in the Quran. And I wish I could tell you that it was in the Quran, but I don't know that for sure. But it's taught in Islam that Jesus himself was not killed and hung on the cross, that someone else was hung instead, and that God took Jesus directly into heaven, that Jesus didn't die. And in fact, there are a number of gospels that never made it into the Bible, but there are a number of gospels that say the very same thing, that
Wow.
Jesus didn't really die. And the early church said, no, that gospel is too weird. We know that Jesus died. All the witnesses said that Jesus really died. And they, saw him in the grave and everything. But the Muslims say, no, Jesus was too holy for that, and God loved him too much. So just like Elijah, and there's another prophet mentioned in the Quran, I can't think of his name, who is not mentioned in the Bible, he went straight to heaven. And Muslims believe that on the last day, when there's a judgment in which God is going to figure out whether you Islamed or not, whether you submitted to the will of God or you went on your own selfish path, it's Jesus that's going to preside over that. The last judgment is the Jesus job. So there's so much Jesus in Islam. But Muslim countries and Christian countries have been battling each other politically so much from the very beginning that those teachings are not well known and they're not emphasized. And I got to tell you, if you ask any kid in a Christian church in America about that, I'm quite sure they've never heard it. You ask a Muslim kid, they might have heard it.
Why is that? Why do you think there's a difference there?
Islam is a minority religion in the United States. Islam is a religion of immigrants in the United States, where people have held on to their faith as a way of remembering where they came from. And there's also quite a bit of memory of what Christians did to Muslims. And so when you're in a foreign country like the United States and you're Muslim and you haven't maybe assimilated very much, your teachers will be sure to tell you, look, those Christians are not so different from us. Jesus was maybe the greatest prophet. If not, he was a very great prophet. But Christians will try to tell you he was the Son of God. And no, you shouldn't believe that.
So if there is so much similarity, and you've done amazingly to deconstruct it and break it down in such a short time as well, so I really appreciate that. If there is so much similarity and they've came from the same tree, these three major religions out of the five, why is there so much conflict if the top of the mountain always seems to be believing and having faith that there is a higher being? Why is there still so much conflict? And do you think they'll ever stop?
Well, I'm going to mix my metaphors a lot because you just gave me a chance. If religion is like a tree, all those little buds at the end of the branches, they're never going to merge. If, on the other hand, religion is like climbers on a mountain, and they all meet at the top and they hug each other and give each other snacks from wherever it is they came from, then they might someday unite. The other metaphor that I like, that my wife and I explored in a year-long kind of a pilgrimage, and we put a blog. My school, Breck School in Minnesota, gave me a sabbatical year to study the way that religions diverge, which is a tree metaphor, and occasionally converge. And for that, I use the metaphor of a river system. And if you can picture being in space and looking down at rivers, there are many of them, but they're gradually braiding together into fewer and fewer tributaries until they become, I don't know, the Amazon or the Rhine or whatever your favorite big river is. And they all flow as a united flow into the sea. So the question is the evolution of religion more like a tree, or is it more like a river? And we're each of us floating along on that river and may say, wow, that river looks a lot like mine. And then someday, maybe in the next world, you and I end up being brothers or something, and off we go down to the sea. Is the destiny of religion to flow together into the sea or continue branching out? And much like yin and yang, those, I think, are two sides of the same question. And much like yin and yang, I don't think I'm smart enough to tell you which one is more important or true. I think somehow they're both true. And if religion can help you find a way to live your life that's both yin and yang and is both tree and river, then, maybe you'll get to the top of the mountain and maybe you can come back.
Yeah.
Life's an adventure.
Very well said. And if there's one action or insight you want the viewers to take from this conversation, what would it be?
Go study religion wherever you can find it, especially if you find it in a person rather than on a website, because people are so wonderful and websites are fine, but people are so wonderful. And so if you can just be like our host, Jacob, and ask good questions and be curious and then stop talking and listen, you might discover what the meaning of your life is, or at least your life for today, because that's the only day you've got.
You've very well said again. And what brings you life personally?
Helping. I love helping other people. I love to cook. When our kids were little, I would give them haircuts. I volunteer at a food pantry because I just get a big kick out of meeting people and encouraging them a little bit and giving them food. I take my grandkids to daycare in the morning, and I love it when they're not having tantrums. And when they are having tantrums, I have to remember why that is developmentally. Helping others is my main motivator. What do you think yours is?
I think understanding the world and myself better, which is the slogan of the podcast, and then sharing that so others can do the same. Because I've had periods as a teenager and as a child where I've not understood why things happen and not understand why I feel a certain way. And I've just been confused by the world. And it brings me a lot of joy to know more about it and know more about people. But it's also beneficial to do that because it allows me to stay afloat, and then combining that with sharing it to people and sharing passions with people is definitely something which brings me a lot of life. So right now, that's definitely what it is.
Well, the fact that it brings you joy is a very good sign, because if something brings you joy, as opposed to just mere happiness, do more, whatever that is, do more of that.
I will. And I hope everyone else will, whatever that brings, whatever joy is brought to them. And if you could give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Immediately, a quotation from my late mother-in-law comes to mind, and it's, "Wouldn't worry so much what other people think of you if you only realized how seldom they do."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's something I literally just a minute ago I was mentioning, trying to understand the world better. And once you understand an insight, it kind of frees you. And then you have the passion to then share it with other people. And I think that insight definitely is one of them. And as a young person, it can be hard, and probably as an old person as well, just as a human, to realize how little people do often think about you and how they're just so enthralled by their own lives. And the way I found that out was through the spotlight effect, which is we often think at some point in our lives that there's a spotlight on us and everyone's looking at us and judging us. But we forget that there's also a spotlight on everyone else. And because everyone else thinks there's a spotlight on them, they're so focused on how themselves basically and how they think others are perceiving them. You actually forget that everyone's just thinking about themselves and therefore not thinking about you. So it's
That's
good
quite
to
right.
remember. It's good to remember not to, but why do you think it's beneficial to realize that most people aren't thinking about you, and what can that do to you?
Because your job is not to please others. Your job is to do the right thing. And that will, as a byproduct, probably please a lot of people. And if it doesn't please the people around you and you keep doing it, you might need to be with a different group of people, or you might need to rethink that. But you're really not in the spotlight as much as you feel. Um, and it's perfectly human to feel that the spotlight's on you, but it really isn't. It's you're shining it, not others.
And how does that relate to helping other people for you?
Or it gets you out of the spotlight. You can't pay attention to the spotlight on yourself if you're looking after children or old people or poor people or customers or podcast subjects or clients. If you really think of what's best for them and you immerse yourself in doing that, you don't lose yourself, but you forget the idea that you're so important, because you really aren't.
Does
In a
that
good way.
relate? Yeah. Yeah, in a really good way. Is that related to losing one's ego? Could that be a parallel?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
very much.
And my curiosity's got the better of me. Do you know where that idea of egos has come from? Is there a specific religion where ego emerged, similar to karma?
Uh, no, I would say that Buddhism does a very good job teaching you to lose track of it and to master it. And I can't think of another religion that does it better. Um,
Mm.
Dalai Lama, certainly, who is a Buddhist, with his insistence on compassion, he's saying, don't make your ego the center. Unify your ego and the other person's ego so that your hearts become more one, or at least you become aware that your heart and their heart are joined, that
Mm.
your humanity and their humanity are all part of the same big organism.
Yeah. And what a way to end it. John Bellaimey, ladies and gentlemen. John, the way you describe all these complex, extremely old and ancient and just amazing religions in such a way for me to understand it as someone who hasn't studied a lot of different religions is amazing. I really appreciate it. And I hope the audience has learned as much as I have about how all the religions intertwine and how they differ. And I, it's been a great episode. I've really appreciated it. And I sometimes feel a bit ignorant when I try and discuss religion on the show, but the way you described it so simply and answered my questions in such a thoughtful way is really appreciate it. And thank you
Yeah,
for coming on the show.
Jacob, you're so welcome. There's nothing wrong with feeling ignorant. Ignorance simply comes from Greek words meaning you don't know, and it's better to say what you don't know and ask about it than to pretend that you do. So,
Yeah.
yeah, have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much. And where can people
All
go
right.
if they want to find more about your stuff, more about your work?
They can look me up on the internet. I have a couple of TED Talks. One is the 5 major world religions, and the other is on yin and yang, and it's got some fantastic animated art. It was done by a fellow in New York for us. I also have a book that's available, online that aren't quite as evil as Amazon. It's called The Tree of World Religions, and it emphasizes more the treeness than the rivers. And then the third place would be the blog that my wife and I have on WordPress, and it's simply called Trees and Rivers Blog.
Awesome. I'll leave everything in the show notes for the audience to check
Okay.
out now. Everyone go check out
Lovely.
that now. Thank you so much for joining me, John. Really appreciate it.
All right.
And you're welcome back
Thank
on
you,
anytime.
Jacob. All right. All the best.